everyone. That's a slightly hard act to follow. Thanks, John. I am not a stand-up comic, and I'm not even going to try. But, so I'm not James Palmer. I am Nicki Ablitt, and I'm here from MPI. So, first of all, tēnā koutou, and I'm here to talk to you about the government approach to adaptation for agriculture. That's quite a big topic for me, given that I only work for one of the agencies, and my team is only 7 weeks old. But I will do my best. So, I'm going to cover stated government intentions with adaptation, a high-level summary of the work across government, and a description of what MPI is planning to do to progress work on adaptation for the primary sector and for rural communities. So I'm afraid I don't have any slides, so this is the only slide you're going to be seeing from me. That's for two reasons. One, the aforementioned aspect of my team not really existing yet. So it was established 7 weeks ago. It's new and it's got a very, very long name that I still have to hold my business card to remember. So we are actually called Climate Change Adaptation, Research and Evidence, which for the quick-witted amongst you, you will realise stands for care. And we do care. So, so we're recruiting basically. I have an absolutely wonderful research and evidence side of my team, which was pre-existing and has a lot to do with this conference. But the adaptation policy people are as yet thin on the ground. So, the other reason is, knowing how many awesome speakers were tabled for the day, I wanted an opportunity to respond meaningfully to the things that other people said. So I knew there were going to be a lot of insights, and I wanted to make sure that we didn't repeat any, and also that we could pick up and respond to anything that seemed really relevant to have a government response to. So I've been writing my notes as I've gone along. Fortunately, I can read my own handwriting, even though no one else can. So, initially, just an overview of why the government is progressing work on adaptation. That's been covered really well, particularly by the first sessions today. So, just a quick summary. Andrew from NIWA sharing with us the state of climate change. So, it's going to change our environment in significant ways. There's going to be serious temperature rises, 10% more drought, and up to 20% more rain in some areas. So, these changes are going to affect everyone in New Zealand, alongside biosecurity issues which are changing, and as Nick said to us, we need to know more about what these changes will be. There's big uncertainties around that. Alongside that, we've got increasing frequency and severity of adverse events, such as floods and forest fires, which are posing serious challenges for the future of agricultural production and getting ministers really worried. So we're getting frequent requests for advice on, so what are we going to do about forest fires? To which it's hard to give an adequate answer. So New Zealand farmers are a significant driver of our economy, obviously. Export revenues apparently forecast to reach 45.6 billion this year. And yet serious challenges from all the climate changes I just described face the agricultural sector. As John Roche reminded us earlier, our agricultural sector has consequences beyond New Zealand. We feed 10 times our population, so our production is important for the people of other countries too. So benefiting from the evidence base you've all been contributing to developing over many years, the government is very aware of issues and risks in this space and wants to be prepared. They have committed to a dual response to climate change, both reducing agricultural emissions and greenhouse gases generally, and also the process of adjusting to actual and expected changes in our environment and conditions caused by gases already released into the atmosphere. As Judy mentioned earlier, I think, we know that some proportion of change is locked in. It doesn't really matter what we do, some change is still going to happen. By engaging in adaptation policy development now, we are hoping to reduce our vulnerability to the effects of climate change. So it's kind of a big task. Adapting to climate change is a huge challenge. Several people have described it as a wicked problem today, and agriculture is definitely one of the most exposed and vulnerable groups to our changing climate, of course. So what are we going to be doing about it? So I'm going to speak briefly across government. I've done quite a lot of engagement in the past 6 or 7 weeks with other ministries, and I will talk a little bit about them. But just bear in mind that there's only so much you can know and only so many people you can meet in that time frame, and there will be work going on that I'm not aware of. So, across government there's high-level action, and Minister O'Connor is going to talk about that tomorrow. He's going to talk about high-level approaches to adaptation and mitigation together. But as a brief taster, I think most of you will be aware of the Zero Carbon Bill, Climate Change Bill, which is going to introduce a requirement for a national adaptation risk assessment and eventually a national adaptation plan. I've been speaking to my colleagues at MFE, the Ministry for the Environment, and they're working hard to kind of co-develop a framework which will support that work to be effective. Meanwhile, Department of Internal Affairs have been doing quite a lot of cross-government work, so they're looking at community resilience actions that respond to the CATWAG report that Judy was talking to us about. Several agencies are contributing to this, and they're going to report back to Cabinet in October this year, but there is a strong focus on insurance and funding strategy implications of adaptation in this work, so someone flagged that earlier as a concern that maybe we're not doing enough, and I can assure you that it's quite high on the agenda, although not easy to fix. So my team is not the only new adaptation team that's in government. The Ministry for the Environment have established one as well, and I hear the Treasury have too, although I haven't met them yet. These teams are kind of looking specifically at how to build resilience in individual sectors while still working together to make sure that our interventions don't work against each other, but work to support each other. So we're kind of conscious that there's a need for agencies to work in a coordinated way, and identify this as a key role for my team as well. We're also working quite closely with the MB team, the Just Transitions team, which you may have heard about. So there's obviously a close relationship here between interventions for climate change adaptation and work to move to a low emissions economy, and making sure that we support people to deal with all of this change, and that the change happens in a just way. The only way to make sure that change happens in a manageable way is to get out there and actually talk to people about what change would look like for them. And that is a big part of the way that my team is planning to work. So we've been established to focus on adaptation specifically, because the Ministry for Primary Industries has got a good history of working in adaptation. Arguably, we've done more than most agencies across government. I was talking to Gerald Rees before, and he reminded me that the SLUMAC fund that we support has been funding adaptation research for more than 10 years. So we've been doing work, but a lot of it's been with a stewardship lens. Now we have the government behind us, and we're able to use that evidence base to drive action. So we already had the fund I just mentioned, and we had the Sustainable Farming Fund, which is kind of helps with sustainable land use change. We also have some afforestation policies, and we do a lot of work with adverse events. I think the big shift, though, is we're trying to move from reactive work, where we step in and do the best we can once something started going wrong, and more into the proactive work that Judy was talking about, where hopefully we can work with people to help them make decisions that will work in the medium and long term, as well as just helping them cope with adverse events or unexpected impacts from a changing climate as they happen. So all of these programs that have been underway are providing a useful platform for the adaptation work of my team. Has been a bit confusing at times because we have so many people working in spaces that are relevant for adaptation, and we don't want to drop the ball by not talking to anybody that's doing valuable work. But we're a policy team in our adaptation side, although we also do have a research and evidence component, which is really useful. From a policy side, though, we're kind of thinking the way that Wendy was thinking earlier when she was talking about how it's great to have all this information, it's great to have tools, and we shouldn't stop doing that, and we shouldn't stop updating them. But there's quite often a gap in terms of having these information and tools and getting people to back them, understand them, and use them. So we're kind of going to be focusing on finding ways to support people with more than just information. So this means, yes, we're going to be providing clear and consistent messaging, but we'll be mainly supporting people to identify adaptation pathways that work for them and make positive choices that help them reduce risks and seize opportunities from a changing climate. From the sound of it, our farmers are beginning to understand the quantum of change ahead, but it's still a lot to manage, right? So we're going to need to be able to help people understand what their options are and understand what reducing risk looks like and what realising opportunities actually looks like from people like Anders. So we're also planning to look at funding and financing options. I know that's key for people. It's come up a couple of times. So I guess what's critical here is we need to find ways to ensure that the costs of adaptation are manageable for farmers and that there's an equitable approach to funding dealing with the impacts of climate change. Minister Jones asked me recently, yeah, it's great that you're doing stuff, but what I want to know is, what's going to happen and who's going to pay for it. And I guess that's the kind of conversation that we need to be able to support people to have, so that communities can decide what's important to them and how they want to finance it, and that can inform the way that the government manages the whole of the framework above that. So, yeah, we're developing a work programme that will ensure we develop implementable ways for the primary sector to proactively and positively respond to climate change. But what that really means is going and working with industry bodies, going and working with farmers, talking to regional council, and making sure that we understand the ways to help people that will be of the most help. We don't want to provide people with a tool that is not the most useful tool. We don't want to leave anyone out of the conversation. We want to make sure that if there are big decisions to be made about massive investments that need to be made across New Zealand, that they are made in a coordinated way. So you're going to be hearing a lot more from both me and my colleagues in the other agency teams about options for dealing with adaptation. As I mentioned earlier, it's a wicked problem, so that means we can't really go to a panel of technical experts and just say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to need to talk to people about how they want to deal with things. So we look forward to receiving your input, however unexpected or left field it may be, because we need to innovate in order to successfully navigate the challenging territory ahead of us. If we're going to be proactive and less reactive, then it's going to be a bit scary, right? Because we're going to go off-piste. We don't necessarily always know what's ahead of us. So we've got to be brave in the options that we look at and in the conversations that we have, while always maintaining investment in a great evidence base, as I'm sure John would remind me. So the previous speakers have given a good flavour of the vastness of the landscape of climate adaptation work, but for government, we've only just begun. So, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, everyone.